So here's what I need to tell you, and I need to tell you straight, because if you weren't glued to a live feed today, you genuinely missed one of the more telling days we've had at Browns camp so far. Day 8. Pads are back on, and the guy everybody's been waiting to see respond, Shedeur Sanders, he answered the bell. I'm recording this while practice is technically still going, so understand, what you're getting from me right now is raw. No spin, no narrative I built ahead of time. Just what my eyes are telling me as the reps happen in real time. Let's start with the moment everybody's going to clip and argue about, because I already know how this goes. Shedeur threw a pick today. I'm not going to bury that, I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen, and I'm not going to make excuses for it before you even see it. He tried to work the ball to Denzel Boston, and honestly, the placement wasn't bad. It arrived where it needed to arrive. The problem is, Grant Delpit had other plans. That man timed his break, closed the gap, and ripped the ball off Boston's hands before it ever had a chance to settle. And look, I want to be fair here, because credit has to go where credit is earned. That's not a coverage bust. That's not sloppy quarterback play. That's a veteran safety, a guy who's made a career out of exactly these kinds of instinctive plays, doing what he does. Denzel's a load, he's a serious weapon, but even a load has to tip his cap to a defender who's simply been doing this longer and reading the game faster. Sometimes the story isn't about a mistake, sometimes it's just about somebody else winning the rep. Now here's why I actually care more about what happened right after that throw than the throw itself. Because reps like that tell you something. They tell you about the wiring of a young quarterback. Does he sink into his own head? Does he start second-guessing himself, playing scared, dinking and dunking to protect his stat line? Or does he shake it off and go attack again? Shedeur's answer came almost immediately. Next real opportunity, he drops a rope right through the guts of the defense, finds Casey Conception in the red zone, and it's a touchdown. And I have to say something here, because I've watched enough of this roster to know what people were saying in the offseason. There were media folks running around saying Boston couldn't separate, that he wasn't a real route runner. Then somehow the same crowd flipped the script and started saying Conception couldn't catch. Well, somebody forgot to tell Conception that because that ball got put on him with zero room for error, right in a phone booth of a throwing window, and he came down with it clean. That's not luck. That's a receiver proving people wrong in real time. What struck me watching this live is how different Shedeur looked once the pads actually came on. His cadence had rhythm to it. His pre-snap operation looked calmer, more decisive. He wasn't hesitating at the line, wasn't second-guessing the picture the defense was showing him. When the ball actually mattered, when bodies were flying and things got physical, he seemed to find another gear instead of shrinking. And I say that as someone who is not interested in falling in love with a prospect just because it's convenient. I want to see it holds up, but today, it held up. While all that was happening, I want to walk you through what I was seeing on the other side of the quarterback room, because this is where things get uncomfortable, and I'm not going to dance around it. Deshaun Watson had a rep in a 7-on-7 period that genuinely stopped me in my tracks. And here's the thing, I didn't even need commentary to understand what went wrong. I watched it without sound the first time, then went back and heard someone insist the receiver was open. Except when you actually study the coverage, there's a clear window. There's a receiver breaking open in a gap that a quarterback at this level should be trained to find and trust. Instead of pulling the trigger, Watson fakes it away and takes off running on what is supposed to be a passing rep, on air, in 7-on-7, where the entire point of the drill is throwing with anticipation. And if that sounds familiar to anyone who's been around this building for more than a year, it should. We watched almost the exact same hesitation show up from Tyler Huntley last summer in similar situational reps. That's not a coincidence I'm comfortable ignoring. And then it happened again. Different period, different setting. This time it's a full team period against the twos, and Watson throws a pick to Tyson Campbell. I want to be very clear about what I saw on that rep, because context matters, and I don't want to strip it away. There were two defenders trailing that route, not one, two. And Tyson Campbell was flat out running a cleaner, faster route than the man he was covering. I thought it might have been Luke Farrell out there getting outrun, and look, I love Luke Farrell. I think he's been one of the honest surprises of this camp, a real O2 blue-collar story. But then I looked again and realized I had the wrong guy entirely. That was actually Isaiah Bond running that route, not Farrell at all. My mistake, and I'll own it. But the larger point doesn't change. That's a football that should never have left Watson's hand in that window against that leverage with that much trailing coverage. Good quarterbacks, even great ones, throw picks in camp. That's part of development, part of installing timing before the lights actually come on in September. I'm not trying to pile on a professional for practice reps, but when you're specifically trying to have an honest conversation about who looks more comfortable running this offense right now, you cannot pretend these throws didn't happen. There was more happening around this that I think deserves attention, because it wasn't just about the football. Reports were coming out of the building in real time. According to Garrett Bush, on that very same series where Watson threw the interception to Campbell, there was also a pre-snap issue on the next play, bad enough that coaches actually stopped the rep at the line of scrimmage to correct it. So in the span of one sequence, you've got an interception, a pre-snap correction, and then a rep where the quarterback pump fakes and tucks the ball to run instead of delivering a strike into a clear window. That is a rough stretch by any measure, and I think it's important that we don't let that get buried under a headline that just says he had a good overall day statistically. Now, in fairness, and I want to be fair, because that's the whole point of doing this the right way, Benchwarmer Sports pointed out that a big piece of Cleveland's install right now has centered on getting off the ball cleanly at the line of scrimmage, on cadence, on operating without penalty. And by that specific measurement, Shedeur had a clean day. No pre-snap flags that I could find, no procedural issues that forced a stoppage. So when Browns media wants to frame pre-snap discipline as some kind of team-wide issue that's separate from quarterback play, I understand the instinct to spread that responsibility around evenly. Offensive linemen jump too, that's real. But I think we also have to be honest that some of what happened today falls specifically on decision-making in the pocket, and that's squarely a quarterback evaluation, not a lineman evaluation. I also want to flag something else going on around this practice, because injuries were piling up today in a way that felt noticeable even watching remotely. There were multiple offensive linemen dealing with something, and Zach Zenter reportedly needed to be carted into the field house. Everybody around the league is currently locked in on the injury situation out in San Francisco, and understandably so, but I think it would be a mistake to ignore that Cleveland is quietly starting to stack their own bumps and bruises up front. That matters for context going forward, because an offensive line that's already thin heading into a real season doesn't need more subtractions in August. And speaking of the offensive line struggling, I have to show you this next moment because it was honestly a little scary in the instant it happened. The starting offensive line got beaten badly on a rep, completely folded, and Titus Howard ends up getting driven straight back into Shedeur. I watched him afterward, and it did not look like a smooth landing. He was on the sideline for a stretch, seemed to be holding himself gingerly, walking a little careful. Now, from what I could see afterward, he appeared to be fine, moving around, no immediate red flag signs. But until we get something official from the coaching staff, I think it's fair to file that under 1 to monitor rather than 1 to dismiss outright. When your quarterback is getting collapsed on because the pocket simply isn't there, that's not a quarterback problem. That's a protection problem, and it's one that could shape how aggressive this coaching staff is willing to let either quarterback play once the season actually starts mattering. I want to bring in a voice that carries real weight here, because I don't think my opinion alone should be the final word on any of this. Bernie Kosar was actually in the building today, watching this practice in person, and after Watson's showing, someone asked him directly for his read on how the offense looked overall. And what he said stuck with me. He talked about how it's still early, that defenses are naturally ahead of offenses this time of year, that we discussed that exact dynamic back in the first week of camp. But then he specifically praised how the offense is starting to actually resemble a functioning NFL offense, consistent, hitting explosive throws down the field, connecting on intermediate and deep in-breaking routes, the sail concepts to the boundary, the deep over routes working across the middle. And he made a point of saying they hit those looks not just in 7-on-7 but critically, in full team periods too, which is the harder environment to earn that kind of rhythm in. Now, I'll be honest with you, normally I don't put much stock in a lot of the noise floating around this building. I've said it before, most of what gets repeated by talking heads is speculation dressed up as insight. But when a legitimate legend of this franchise, somebody who actually played the position at an elite level and knows exactly what good quarterback rhythm looks like from the inside, says something that specific and that positive, I think you have to sit up and actually listen. Let me walk you through the rotation piece too, because I think it's genuinely interesting and maybe tells us something about what the coaching staff is trying to build. During the pass scenario period, Watson ran with the starters. Then they rotated him out and brought in Dillon Gabriel to work with the ones as well. That's not something you typically see if a competition is settled cleanly in one direction. My honest read, and I want to stress this is a read, not a confirmed fact, is that the staff may be trying to protect and build up Watson's confidence right now, because if you watch the tape closely, and I mean really watch it, not just skim it for highlights, he looks unsettled the moment the pads go on and contact becomes live. That pre-snap hesitation, the pump fake instead of a trigger pull, the interception with two defenders trailing, all of that paints a picture of a quarterback who isn't fully comfortable yet in this version of the offense. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt here too, because he was working primarily with the second group for stretches, and it is officially the tail end of install, which means some of this rust is expected and even normal. I'm not trying to bury a guy over August reps, but I also can't pretend the tape says something it doesn't. Now let's pivot, because I think the receiver room deserves its own spotlight today, and there's real substance here worth talking through. I'll admit something to you honestly. I needed to be convinced on Casey Conception coming into this camp. I wasn't sold immediately. But Denzel Boston, I knew what he was the moment I started watching him work. An absolute problem for opposing corners. Physically gifted in a way that shows up even in practice reps. And on the defensive side, Jared Verse is a guy I never needed selling on either, but he's clearly out here selling himself anyway with how he's playing. I'll say it plainly, I don't think there's going to be much of a drop-off at all from what this defense produced a year ago. If anything, early returns suggest this unit might actually be better. The offensive line is still holding on and fighting through some rough moments, that much is obvious from today alone, but you have to assume Verse is squeezing every bit of value out of these reps while he has them. And that's the theme of the entire defensive side of the ball through camp so far: sharp, disciplined, operating like they're playing a different sport than the group across from them. Let me give you the full numbers now, because stats matter here even if they don't tell the whole story by themselves. Shedeur finished the day completing right around 68% of his throws, basically pushing 70, with 1 touchdown and 1 interception, and he was the only quarterback in the building to throw a touchdown during that red zone period. Watson went 11 for 16, which on paper looks respectable, sitting around that same 68% completion range. And look, I want to be balanced here, because that's the responsible way to cover this. It's not accurate to say Watson had a bad day in some catastrophic sense. He didn't. He was working primarily against the twos rather than the starting defense, and efficiency-wise, the raw completion percentage actually held up fine. What separates the two performances isn't really the box score. It's the decision-making under duress, the pre-snap operation, the willingness to trust a window and pull the trigger instead of bailing on a designed pass. Shedeur had exactly 1 interception the entire day, bounced back from it immediately with a touchdown drive, and didn't have a single flagged pre-snap issue that I could find. Watson had a tougher collection of moments stacked closer together: an interception, a pre-snap correction on the very next snap, and then a decision to tuck and run instead of delivering into a legitimate opening. Those are the details that actually separate a good day from a rough one, even when the surface-level stats look similar. They wrapped things up today with one-on-ones instead of the 2-minute drill, which threw me off for a second while I was watching live, so if you caught me looking a little confused midstream, that's exactly why. But stepping back from the individual reps and looking at the day as a whole, here's where I land. This is still August. This is still install. Defenses are always going to be ahead of offenses at this stage of camp. That's just the rhythm of every training camp in this league, and Kosar himself made a point of saying that plainly. But within that context, The story of today was Shedeur Sanders responding to real adversity with poise, operating with a cleaner pre-snap process, finding chunk plays down the field, and closing out a red zone drive with the only passing touchdown of the entire practice. Meanwhile, Watson had flashes of the talent that's obviously still there, but also had a stretch of reps that raise real, fair questions about comfort level and decision-making once the pads are on and the game speeds up around him. Add in an offensive line that's clearly struggling and starting to accumulate injuries, and you've got a genuinely fascinating, high-stakes situation developing in that quarterback room heading into the rest of camp. I'll keep watching, I'll keep pulling clips, and I'll bring you the next update the moment something meaningful happens on that practice field. This competition is far from over, and if today taught us anything, it's that the margin separating these two right now might be smaller than the headlines suggest, but it's also not nothing. Stay tuned because this story is only going to get more interesting from here.